as Nigerians, it is in our best interest to care for the welfare of our people. And housing is almost a fundamental right of every Nigerian. And I'm glad that the President prioritized housing as one of the key pillars of his campaign promise, especially in ensuring that Nigerians get better housing, regardless of what their social status is, and regardless of how much money they make. One of the key things we have a responsibility for is to mobilize capital, not only within government, but from private sector and the international community to address priority sectors of our economy. Housing is one of those. When we think about housing, it's not just about the social impact it has in terms of housing our people, but it's a major stimulant for the economy. If we think about how much investment has been made by private sector, especially with respect to cement production, tiles, and other building materials, many of them, when you speak to them, they will tell you that the reality has not panned out the way they thought when they made the investments, because the demand has really not met up with that. No major economy expects that if you want to own a home, you have to pay for the home upfront. It's just not realistic. That is the most important investment that most people make in their lifetime. And it's also usually the most expensive investment that they make. To expect someone to afford to buy the home full amount upfront is just not realistic. And so in the President's wisdom, even from when he was campaigning, he promised that he would do whatever he can to ensure that many more Nigerians can afford to own their own homes without necessarily having to pay for it upfront. So long as they can provide a deposit for it. There should be a mortgage that is low cost, which is cheap, also long term, but also at scale, so that many more Nigerians can benefit from it. But can government alone provide that amount of money you need for that? Of course not. Can people go to the banks and borrow money at 32% to get a mortgage? Of course not. If you go today for most banks, the maximum you're probably going to get is 5 years and at 32%, because banks are not going to lend you their money at below that amount because they have to make profit. Can we allow that to continue, where if you can't afford to pay at 32% interest rates and only 5% tenure? Of course, that is not going to be sustainable for us as a country. So the President directed us through the Minister of Finance to look for ways to work with the key stakeholders to mobilize liquidity for the sector, where all the key players would benefit from that liquidity, starting from Federal Mortgage Bank, which happens to be, we are shareholders in Federal Mortgage Bank as MOFI, Family Homes Funds, where we're also shareholders, Federal Housing, who are key stakeholders within the sector, and many of the other players, the primary mortgage banks, need liquidity, the mortgage financing company, NMRC, who are also shareholders. And we consulted widely with all of these stakeholders, including NMRC. NMRC was set up to refinance existing mortgages. But because we do not have enough active mortgages that have been created, through the Minister of Housing and his colleague, the Minister of State, driving the Renewed Hope Housing Estate, the question is, once we build those houses, who are those people that can afford to buy the houses? If we do not provide liquidity on the demand side, which is to enable people to have mortgages that are reasonably priced, with longer term, 10, 15, 20 years, we will end up in a situation where we may succeed in building those houses, but we will not have enough people to buy the houses. So we'll end up with abandoned estates, and we can't afford that. So while we build these houses, not only through the Renew Hope program, but through other private sector initiatives, we need to provide liquidity that allows Nigerians to afford the mortgages to buy these houses. We also need to make sure that we're not only relying on government money for mortgages. We need to create structures, we need to create incentives to attract private sector and other institutional investors to bring in their money into the housing sector, which is what informs the MOFI Real Estate Investment Fund. It is a structure that is registered with Securities and Exchange Commission. It is regulated, and it also has a governance that allows private sector to feel comfortable to bring in their money into the sector and also to be able to exit profitably. While at the same time, government will achieve its own objectives of creating jobs, of growing the economy, housing Nigerians and ensuring that we get that sector moving again. What that also does is that when we originate these mortgages, it makes it easier for NMRC, for instance, to be able to also raise money from other sources and refinance those houses. But if you do not originate those mortgages, there is nothing for you to refinance, and the sector just stops. And so the Murphy Real Estate Investment Fund, which is EMRI, was established as a mechanism to bring both private sector and public sector together to mobilize capital at scale to provide mortgages that will be low cost